All right, so I'm going to begin tonight's class by doing something a bit different than usual. I'll ask you to please help yourself to one of those papers and pens in the middle of the table. Now, those of you who have the student book, that chart is in there as well, but I just printed out some extra copies because we're actually going to fill them in, and you probably prefer to do that on the paper. Now, I'm going to explain the chart in more detail later on in the class, but for now, I'd like you to take a look, please, at the very top of the chart, where it says personality. And take a minute to think about what makes you, you. Your talents, your passions, your skills. And write down some of them in the box under the heading examples. And you do not need to share them, so feel comfortable to write whatever you wish over there. Okay, everybody ready? Now let me ask you like this. Do you think whatever you wrote in that box, whatever makes you, you, does that define your purpose of being here? Or is there a purpose to you just being, regardless of what you contribute, regardless of your talents and your passions? Even if you did nothing all day, you just are here.
Definitely not just here. But does this define me?
Does it define your purpose? Does it contribute to your purpose?
It contributes.
Okay, contributes but doesn't define.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on that? What would the difference be?
Well, I learned from Rabbi Dabrowski years ago that my purpose is to serve God.
Mm-hmm.
So in whatever way I can, and these will contribute to my doing that, but they aren't my purpose.
Okay, so you're saying there are many other factors that contribute to your purpose, this being just some of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything? Okay, let's hold on to this thought, and we're going to return to it. Okay? Tonight is actually the very beginning of the next Hebrew month, the second Adar. This year we have two Adars. In last class we discussed the first Adar, now we're beginning the second Adar, which means that in exactly 2 weeks from today, we have the holiday of Purim.
And we discovered that Natalia's birthday is on the 13th.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So that means
Going
it's
into
on
Purim.
the second Adar now?
Yeah. No, it means this year it is.
This year it's in the second Adar.
Yes, because
Oh, I see.
there are two Adars.
Oh, I see. So it
But
will
in a
vary
non-leap
then.
year, it's always on the 13th of Adar, and it's just called Adar.
Adar, oh, I see. Okay.
Usually, whatever takes place in Adar, in a leap year, it's in the second Adar.
Oh,
Unless that event took place specifically when it was a leap year in the first Adar.
oh, I see.
Okay. So we start feeling Purim in the air. So whether that's on a practical level, we're starting to get ready for Purim. We also have the spiritual energy of Purim in the air. And as we get closer and closer, that gets stronger and stronger. So just a word about what Purim is all about. What are we celebrating on Purim? So I don't know how familiar you all are with the Purim story, perhaps to different degrees. I'll give a short synopsis of the Purim story, and we'll move on from there. So it all began in the 4th century, before the Common Era. King Ahasuerus was the king of the Persian Empire, which spanned 127 lands, so very, very large, and he ruled all of that and all the people in those lands. He had just got rid of his queen, Queen Vashti, because she did not obey him. That gives us an idea of what kind of king he was. So now he's at the point of looking for a new queen. And he gathered all the girls in his entire kingdom, and he chose his queen from amongst them, who happens to be, of all the girls, Jewish Esther. She became the queen, Queen Esther. Meanwhile, around this time, King Ahasuerus appoints a new prime minister, Haman, who was definitely not a Jew lover, and that would be quite the understatement. Especially since once he achieved this position of power, he became prime minister, he's quite puffed up with his own importance, and he decides that everybody needs to bow down to him when he passes, because he is so important, he is the king's right-hand man. But of course, the Jews, led by Mordechai, the leader, the Jewish leader at the time, who also happened to be Esther's uncle, they would not bow down. We don't bow down to people, we only bow down to our one God, Hashem. And this enraged Haman to no end, until he decided he's going to choose a date out of a lottery. In Persian, a lottery is Pur, hence the name Purim, the name of the holiday. He chose a date. This is the date he's going to get rid of all the Jewish people. He's just going to kill them all out. And the day he chose was Yud Gimel Adar, the 13th day of Adar. So when the Jews heard of this decree, Mordechai immediately gathered them all together to pray together, to fast together, to beg God to save them. And as well, Mordechai went to speak to his niece Esther at the palace. And he begged her, being that she's in this position of power, she is in a position that no other Jewish person is in. She has an opportunity that no other Jewish person could take advantage of. And he begs her to please go speak to the king, who has the ultimate say, to take away this decree, to do something. And she struggles with this because it was at great risk to her life. No one was just allowed to go to the king when they wanted to. They had to be called. And if someone just shows up at an audience with the king, they may lose their life if the king decides. That's the kind of mood that he's in. But in the end, Esther agreed to do it. And she went to the king, Ahasuerus, and what did she ask? She asked if, together with Haman, they can come to a party that she is going to host. And that's what happened. She hosted them at a party, and at that party, when Ahasuerus asked what it is he can do for her, she requested they come to a second party. And it was at that second party where she reveals her true identity to King Ahasuerus, that she is a Jew. And there is an evil man who wants to wipe out her and her entire people. And she points to Haman. And of course, the king is enraged, who wants to hurt the queen and her people. And instead of Mordechai hanging on the gallows that Haman prepared, Haman was hung on his own gallows. And Mordechai was appointed prime minister instead. Not only that, but King Ahasuerus granted the Jewish people an opportunity to defend themselves against their enemies, which they did on the 13th day of Adar. Instead of them being wiped out, they were able to defend themselves against all their enemies who wanted to kill them. And then on the next day, the 14th day of Adar, they rested from the battle, safe, and were able to celebrate their miraculous salvation. And that's why, until today, every single year on the 14th of Adar, we remember this, and we relive it, and we celebrate it. Now, like every Jewish holiday, there are 4 mitzvot. Well, not always 4, but there's always mitzvot, and on Purim there are 4. And those are integral to our celebration of the day. So number 1, we have the mitzvah of Megillah. What is the Megillah? So the Megillah is a scroll on which is written the entire chain of events of the Purim story. And we have a mitzvah to listen to that twice, once at night, as Purim begins, and again the next day. The second mitzvah is called Matanat Le'evyonim, which means gifts for the poor. So while every single day we have an obligation to give to the poor, there is a special mitzvah to do this on Purim. And the mitzvah is to give to at least 2 needy people. And it's said that on Purim, anybody who stretches their arm out, so to speak, and asks for help, we don't judge, we don't evaluate, we just give to whoever needs and whoever asks. So that's the second mitzvah of Purim. The third mitzvah of Purim is called Mishloach Manot. And this is a mitzvah where we give gifts of food to our friends. And the reason for this is actually 2 reasons given. One reason is we want to perpetuate this feeling of unity and brotherhood amongst the Jewish people that was felt then on the original Purim. And so we give gifts to our friends. And another reason given is so as not to embarrass the poor people who are receiving perhaps gifts of food or other contributions. We give to everybody, and then no one is embarrassed. Now, the mitzvah Mishloach Manot is to give at least 2 different foods to at least 1 person. And the way we define 2 different foods is 2 foods, each one has a different blessing. So, for example, a cake and a drink. Those have 2 different blessings, or a fruit and cake, or a fruit and vegetable, whatever it is, just 2 separate foods ready to eat that have 2 different blessings. And the custom is that men give to men and women give to women, and that it's done through a third party. So if possible, not to give it directly, but to send someone as a messenger to give. So let's say I'm giving to Rivka, so I might give my Mishloach Manot to Valentina and say, Valentina, could you please be my messenger to give the Mishloach Manot to Rivka? And if I'm giving to Valentina, I might give it to Natalia to pass it on. If I'm giving to Natalia, I might give it to Rivka to pass it on. So through a third party.
Is it legitimate to give it to a child?
Yes, absolutely. And kids love
It
it.
doesn't have to be an adult.
No, it doesn't. And kids are actually a good way to do it because they love it. They enjoy it. So it's nice to make them part of it in that way as well. So that's the third mitzvah of Purim. And then we have the very last, 4th mitzvah, which is the Purim feast. And that's a festive meal that begins towards the end of Purim, so late afternoon, and then continues on into the night following the holiday of Purim. And it's a meal that includes wine, that includes meat, a festive meal to commemorate the events. So those are the 4 obligations of Purim. But I do want to mention there are 2 other customs that almost became mitzvot because we're so careful to do it that are associated with Purim. So first, a little bit of background to those. Do you know in the whole Megillah, the whole story of Purim, we do not find God's name mentioned even once. Not once. If you read the Megillah without knowing anything else, it just looks like one coincidence after another. King Ahasuerus needed a queen. He happened to pick Esther. So when the Jews are in trouble, oh, perfect, Esther's in the palace. Esther's available to help. The king loves his queen. He wanted to help. And boom, the Jews were saved, right? It kind of looks like natural. Things just sort of evolved naturally. But of course, the fact that the Jews were saved from Haman was a great miracle, and God's hand was behind everything. And this teaches us that the events in our own lives very often look natural, look just like random coincidences, and just life evolves that way. But the story of Purim teaches us that it's not quite that way. There's always God there, even if it's not apparent, even if we don't have God's name staring us in the face, and it's not that obvious. Like in the Megillah, God is always behind everything. And that is the reason behind the costumes on Purim. Did you ever wonder why kids and adults too sometimes are in disguise on Purim? It's to remind us of this idea that God's hand was kind of in disguise, was disguised by these natural events that were taking place. But really inside, really underneath that disguise was God. So we might be dressed up as this or that, but inside it's really us, to remember what the truth really is under the disguise. And that is also the reason behind another Purim custom, famous custom. Any guess? Oh, you're saying the gragger. I was actually thinking of something else. But why the gragger? Why would you say this is expressed in the gragger?
The name of Haman.
How does that show God's hidden hand?
Oh, how does it show his hidden hand?
It does. That's kind of a long answer, though. But it's interesting that you brought that up because it also does express it. But I was actually thinking of a different Purim custom. It has to do with food. I mean, how could we have a holiday without a particular food associated with it? The Hamantashen. From the outside, everyone familiar with the Hamantashen? Aznei Haman? So from the outside, it just looks like a triangular piece of dough. But hidden inside is the inner sweetness. So again, what's on the outside is not always exactly as it seems. There is something hidden inside, hidden behind. And that's what Purim is all about. So that's Purim in a nutshell.
You're a great storyteller.
Oh, thank you, Rivka.
Wow.
That was really in a nutshell, though. And if anyone wants to know more details, I highly recommend to read the Purim story in even more detail. Now, do you consider Purim a major holiday on the Jewish calendar, or would it be more one of the minor holidays on the Jewish calendar? You say it's major? Okay.
Because it was like Nes Gadol.
It was, absolutely.
Yes,
Mhm.
all that is survived.
Absolutely, it was a great miracle. And you're right. Now, the thing is that Purim is not a biblical holiday. It's like Hanukkah. It's a rabbinic holiday. So sometimes, if people don't know any better, they tend to assume that the biblical holidays like Sukkot, Pesach, Passover, those holidays are the major holidays in the Jewish calendar, and the rabbinic holidays are the minor ones. Right, the Shalosh Regalim, exactly. But of course, as Valentina correctly said, there's nothing minor about Purim. And in fact, our rabbis throughout our history never referred to Purim, or Hanukkah for that matter, as minor. They're just as important as the biblical holidays that we celebrate.
They're just celebrated slightly differently.
Right. But in fact, ironically enough, throughout this whole series this year, we've had a thread that we introduced in the very first class, and that has been carrying through each class in particular. And that is the spiritual energy that comes along with each Jewish holiday, right? We started off this whole series by describing how every time a holiday comes around, the same energy that was there when that holiday originally took place is there every single year, growing, even greater every single year. And what's interesting, that this concept is hinted to specifically in Purim, twice, in two different ways. If you take a look at text, it's all the way in the appendix, actually. It's text 1 in the appendix. So you have that on page 113. There's a verse in the Megillah, Megillas Esther, that we read on Purim,
Just a minute,
113. These days of Purim shall be remembered and actualized. Now, a famous scholar, the Chida, gives us a beautiful explanation on this verse. Take a look in the text. How does he explain it? What does it mean that the events of Purim shall be actualized every year? It's exactly as we explained with regards to every single holiday, that every year, on the same day, the spiritual effects that transpired during the time when the events took place will occur. And this is something we learn from a verse in the Megillah. So it's true about every holiday, and it's definitely true about Purim. There's nothing minor about the energies surrounding Purim. And another very interesting thing about Purim, if you look at text 2a, and this is a quote from the Talmud. One who reads the Megillah backwards does not fulfill one's religious obligation. Now tell me, why would anyone read the Megillah backwards? What exactly does that mean? Reading it backwards will not make any sense, and it will probably take a lot longer. So why would this even be a consideration? The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, has a beautiful explanation on this passage from the Talmud.
It would tend to hide the story.
It would be very hard to understand. Yeah. Well, this is how the Baal Shem Tov looks at it. Reading the Megillah backwards is like reading the Megillah as if it's an ancient story, something that happened many, many years ago. But if we view the story of Purim as something that simply happened, something that's ancient, then we have not fulfilled our obligation of celebrating Purim properly. Because the way we have to celebrate Purim is we have to live it now. We have to look at the Megillah forwards, contemporary. It has a message that's relevant for us now. It's not backwards.
Boy, is it.
And boy, is it relevant. To the extent that this Megillah, this scroll with the Purim story, is actually one of the 24 books of the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. So it definitely has a very timeless message and something that's very relevant to us today. And that is what we will be exploring in tonight's class. So I'd like you to take a look at text number 2. So we're going back now to page 102 in your books. And we're going to examine deeper a certain passage from the Megillah. It's a passage that's describing Queen Esther's moment of truth. Let's take a look at it on the inside.
Did you say 1 or 2?
102, exactly. Now, just a bit of background so you know what point in the story we're holding over here. This is after Haman's decree became public news. Everyone now knows that the Jewish people will be killed on the 13th day of Adar. And Mordechai has come to Esther to ask her to please do something, to please intercede with the king.
Is it a translation? I think she has Hadassah.
Yes, she has 2 names,
2 names.
Hadassah and Esther. Okay, so let's take a look at this text inside. It's a quote from the Megillah. And Mordechai gave him a copy of the writ of the decree that was given in Shushan to show to Esther. So how is Mordechai communicating with Esther? Esther's in the palace.
Mordecai gave him a copy?
So, exactly. Excellent question. How is he communicating with Esther? It's through a messenger. Because Mordechai couldn't just speak to Esther whenever he wanted. She's the queen. She's in the palace. So he gave, and at this point, Esther knows nothing of what's happening outside of the palace, right? She doesn't even know that there's this terrible decree on her people. So Mordechai gave a copy of this decree that's circulating in all the lands to a messenger to bring to Esther, to tell her and order her to go before the king, to beseech him and beg him to save the lives of her people. And Esther sends back a message to Mordechai. Esther responds, all the king's servants and even the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman comes to the king unsummoned into his inner courtyard, the law is unequivocal, a penalty of death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him will his life be spared. But I have not been summoned to come to the king for 30 days. So she really is in danger of losing her life if she just appears suddenly in King Ahasuerus's inner chamber. So this is the message she passes back to Mordechai. When they told Esther's words to Mordechai, Mordechai instructed this reply to Esther. So now Mordechai is sending back a message to Esther. And here we get to her moment of truth. What is his message? Don't imagine that you alone, out of all the Jews, will escape by being in the king's palace. Actually, if you stay quiet now, the Jews will find relief and safety through a different route. And who knows, perhaps the monarchy came your way precisely for this moment. And at that point, when Esther got the message, she did go into King Ahasuerus, and miraculously, he stretched out his scepter, and her life was spared, and her request was granted.
She fasted 3 days first.
She did, yeah, she prepared herself, just like the rest of the Jews are fasting as well. Now, in these last few lines of Mordechai's second message to Esther, we see something very interesting. We see two conflicting messages. You see what I mean? What are those two conflicting messages? I see you're nodding, Rivka. What are those two messages?
Let them.
Anybody who would like?
If
Go
I
ahead.
want for myself, who will be for me? And if
Oh,
I
okay, that's the next. We're going to get to that soon, Natalia. That's the next text that we're going to look at. But in the text that we just read, the last few lines, it seems to be that Mordechai is sending Esther a conflicting message.
The Jews may survive if she doesn't intervene as she is meant to. They may survive just the same, however she may not.
Okay, so one message, very good. One message is that one way or the other, whether Esther takes up this challenge or not, the Jews will be saved somehow. That's one message. And then, in the next line, what does he say?
Monarchy came your way precisely for this moment.
Exactly. So, do the Jewish people need Esther or not? On one hand, Mordechai is saying, you know what, Esther? Fine. If you don't want to help, don't help. The Jews will be saved some other way. But on the other hand, he's saying, no, Esther, we need you. This might be the very reason you became queen. Why on earth would a Jewish girl like you become the queen? Perhaps it's because this was the role you were created for. So, do we need Esther or not? If Esther doesn't do it, the Jews will be saved another way. Yet, perhaps this is why Esther was created, and she is pivotal here in saving the Jews. So which is it?
She is pivotal
She is pivotal. So why would the Jews be saved some other way if she decides not to do it?
because she is not going to decide not to do it. She couldn't do that.
Well, we all have free choice.
True, but she's going to choose to help. She's that kind of a person.
Okay, so we already know the end of the story. But imagine Esther is hearing this message.
Yeah.
And she's torn because she really is going to risk her life. So on one hand, she's hearing, well, if she doesn't do it, the Jews will still be saved. So maybe it's not worth risking her life. But on the other hand, she's hearing, Esther, this is why you're queen. We need you. So which message should she base her decision on?
Well, if the Jews are going to be saved anyway, she'll be saved anyway.
Ah, that's a good point. But she doesn't know that for sure.
She doesn't know that.
But
She doesn't know exactly how it's going to come about. Right, okay, so if the Jews are going to be saved anyway, then she could just sit back and not have to worry about going to King Ahasuerus. So why doesn't she just do that?
But it might be a horrible way that they're saved.
Okay,
And besides,
Maybe.
Jews help each other.
it's true.
I'm missing something.
That's true. No, you're actually, step by step, we're coming to something here. And all your remarks are actually very, very good. Well, the truth is, in all the different events that God orchestrates here in our world, there are two components. There are the proceedings, what happens, the proceedings. And then there are the people, the proceedings and the people. So in the situation of Esther, for example, the Jews are in trouble. The Jews need to be saved. What needs to happen will happen. Whatever needs to proceed will proceed. The Jews will be saved. That's one element in God's plans. Something needs to happen, it will happen. But the other element here is the people involved. that God creates custom-made rules for every person so that a particular event, some particular proceedings, should be carried out through a specific person. So yes, if Esther decided not to go ahead, Hashem would have found another way to save the Jewish people. But it wouldn't be through Esther's rule. Nobody else could fill her role. The salvation of the Jewish people would not come about through a queen, through the palace, through intervention of King Achashverosh. It would come about in a different way. Because this role was custom made for Esther. She was the one who was meant to be the messenger to carry out this plan. And if she doesn't do it, it won't happen that way.
So are both she and Mordechai prophets?
Yes, actually Esther is one of the 7 female prophetesses in history.
It's showing here that Mordechai is also.
Yes, and Mordechai is actually giving her a glimpse of what her purpose may very well be. That's right. And this teaches us something very important about our role as well, that every single one of us has a custom role created for us to fill. That there are events in this world where we have a job. We are instrumental in making that event happen. Now, that event will happen anyways, that's not up to us. But what is up to us is that we take on that role that we are supposed to have in that event.
So in a sense, we all are gifted with a little bit of prophecy, if we care to pay attention to it.
Oh, so that's actually what we're going to discuss at length tonight, is how do we figure out what our mission is? And that's an excellent, excellent question. And what we'll do is we'll start from a quote, and this is what you were starting to read, Natalia, a quote from Ethics of Our Fathers. Okay, so those are chapters from the Mishnah that don't deal with legal aspects of Judaism, but more with the ethics and our behavior, our code of behavior in Judaism. So in Ethics of Our Fathers, we have a very famous quote by Hillel. And that's text 3 on page 103, the same page. Im ein ani li mili. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? Uchsha'ani la'atzmi ma'ani. And if I am only for myself, what am I? Ve'im lo achshav masai. And if not now, when? So what we have here is we have 3 parts to the saying. And what we are going to do is we are going to establish 3 facts about our personal missions in this world.
So was this written before or after the event of Purim?
The event of Purim?
No, was this statement of the Ethics of the Fathers, was that written before or after?
Before or after Megillah? After. This is after. The story of Esther took place in between the first temple and the second temple during the Babylonian exile. The Mishnah came during the time of the second temple. So it's quite a bit later.
Yes, but the Mishnah quotes predecessors, doesn't it?
Yes, but even those that are quoted in the Mishnah came later. Hillel Hazake, the author of this, this is Hillel, and he came later.
Sorry.
No, it's a great question. Okay, so let's take a look at the 3 parts. Let's dissect it a little bit. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? So, yes, ultimately, God's plan will come about. But if I don't fulfill my role, nobody else will fulfill my role. My role was custom made for me. If I don't do it, no one will do it. That's number 1. My role is custom made for me. Okay, there's no one else who can do it. Number 2, if I am only for myself, what am I? And this is telling us that whatever our purpose is, whatever our unique purpose is, unique to me, unique to you, it's not only for self-fulfillment. It's a purpose that's part of a greater purpose, that we're here to contribute to the world at large. And another element to this is that you can't really determine your life mission on your own. It's very good to speak to someone, to discuss with somebody more objective, to figure it out. As in the case of Esther, it was Mordechai who pointed it out to her. So if I'm just going to figure it out for myself, what am I? It's not going to help me much with my purpose. We need to discuss with others. And the final thing we establish here about our personal mission is, if not now, then when? No moment in history is going to come around a second time. And if it looks like this opportunity is the opportunity that you were created for, this is your custom-made role, then we need to grab it. Otherwise, it's too late. We missed it.
And what if you think you've had the opportunity already, you've fulfilled it, and then another one comes up?
So then we move on. We're not put in this...
Treat it the same way.
Absolutely. Yeah, as we will see what goes into forming a mission.
What our real mission
Right. We don't know 100%, but we can try and get an idea. Okay. Now, one other thing, before we get to figuring out how to figure out what our personal mission is, there's one other general thing we could establish when it comes to a mission. And that is, what is the general purpose of creation? We need to put our personal missions into the context or the framework of the general purpose of creation. And that I think we've spoken about many times. What is the general purpose of creation? Why did God create this world and put people here and put all of creation here? It's really for one purpose only, which is?
His pleasure.
His pleasure, exactly. What is God's pleasure? What are we doing to make God happy? What does he want of us?
That we should serve him.
Exactly. So basically, to make this a spiritual world, to make this a place, as we say, where God feels at home. Where does God feel at home? In a world of spirituality, of holiness, of mitzvot. And so that's why we're here, to transform this materialistic world into a spiritual world. So whatever our personal mission ends up being, that's something important to keep in mind, that it should fit into the framework of the general mission of the world. Okay? So far we established, number one, only you can fulfill your unique mission. Number two, it's a mission that's not only about self-fulfillment, it's a mission that's going to contribute to others. Number three, always be on the alert, because you never know when your mission's going to pop up, and you might miss that opportunity. And number four, it needs to fit into the context of the world's general mission. Now, moving on, how do we figure out what our personal mission is? And like you said, Rivka, we can never know 100%. Only God knows that. But we could get a pretty good idea. If we have a direction in life, we have some sort of guide, then we could probably figure it out somewhat. Now, there are all kinds of factors that contribute to our personal mission. There are internal factors, like your personality. We started the class, right? What type of person you are, what you're good at, your talents, your passions, your fears, all kinds of things that are inside you that will contribute to your personal mission. And then, as you said correctly then, Rivka, that's not it. That can't be the only thing our mission is about. There are also external factors, such as opportunities that come our way in life, such as the people we find in our lives, such as the places we find ourselves in our lives. All of that contribute to our personal mission.
Sorry, I'm just remembering some things.
I read one story long ago. One person want to be rabbi. He learn Mishnayot, everything. Come to another rabbi and said, I want to be rabbi. And the rabbi told him, you better to be on the horses with it's for your soul. It's better if you will be on the...
A wagon driver?
Yes. And that person became very happy in this place.
Right.
Everybody was disappointed around him, but he was very happy. Just
And did he ever find out what his particular mission was in that job?
I don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe.
But that's true. You never know what you were put here for, you know? Now, we have all these factors that contribute to our personal mission, but the trick is, how do we deal with those factors? Are we reactionary? So in other words, do we consider ourselves a victim of all these factors? I was born like this, so I can't help it. Or this and this person makes me feel like this, I can't help it. Or let's say, for example, let's say, I can't help being in a bad mood around her because she's so arrogant. Or I have a temper. I can't help it that I react in an angry way. We can become victims of our circumstances, of where we find ourselves, opportunities we were or were not given, the people in our lives, etc., etc. Or we could take a look at all our life circumstances, all these different factors, internal, external, and be proactive about them. Think to ourselves, wow, if God gave me this set of circumstances, this set of traits, these kind of people in my life, these are all probably opportunities for me to do something with them. And what we're going to do is we're going to break down these factors into 4 categories. Personality, and this goes back to your chart. Personality, opportunities, people, and places. And each of these is like a puzzle piece in your life. You have the piece called your personality. You have the piece called your opportunities in life. You have the piece called the people. You have a piece called the place you find yourself in. When you put all these puzzle pieces together, you begin to form a complete picture of what you're supposed to be doing and what direction you're supposed to be heading in. So let's begin with personality. In the book of Proverbs, we're instructed to serve God with all our possessions. And what do you think this means? What are possessions referring to?
Our abilities.
Ah, excellent. So you're already on the midrashic interpretation, which is excellent, because the literal explanation often is with our wealth. Our possessions are things, our material things, our wealth. Whatever we have, we should use it to serve God. But Rivka, you are beyond that. And you're on the interpretation of the Midrash, which is text 5 in your books. And the Midrash says exactly as you say. This means with whatever he has graced you. So, for example, if you have a beautiful voice, lead the communal prayers. And then the Midrash continues on and gives an example. Chia, the nephew of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, had a beautiful voice. Rabbi Elazar used to tell him, Chia, my son, rise and honor the Lord with what he has graced you. So we all have our unique talents and qualities that God has given us individually. Even if you consider our womanhood, we have something to contribute to the world that the men cannot contribute. So if you take a minute to look back at what you jotted down at the beginning of class, your unique qualities, choose one and bring it to the next box, the application box. Think how that quality can contribute, can become part of your life's mission. Okay, number 2, the next puzzle piece in your life is opportunities. Nothing that happens to us in life is random. The Baal Shem Tov, so going back to Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, one of his famous teachings is that everything that happens in this world is hashgacha pratit, hashgacha pratis, or divine providence. What does that mean, divine providence? They're 2 very big words. What exactly does it mean?
God's intention.
God's intention, okay. Well, as usual, to get a good, accurate translation of the Hebrew, it's best to go back to the Hebrew. So let's examine those words for a moment. Hashgacha. What does hashgacha mean?
Valentina.
Putin.
It's actually a familiar word in a different context of Jewish life. Think kashrut. What does hashgacha mean?
Right.
Hashgacha, supervision. You know, in kashrut, you have someone called the mashgiach, the one who supervises the kashrut in any given establishment to make sure that it's kosher. Hashgacha means supervision. So what we learn from this word hashgacha is it's not just that God knows what's going on in the world, he's all-knowing, he's also constantly supervising what's going on in this world. He's watching everything, not just knowing it. But even more than that, pratit, hashgacha pratit. What does pratit mean?
Aiming it directly at each individual person.
Details. He's not supervising in a general sense. He's supervising every single little detail, even the moving of a blade of grass. God is supervising. So if even a blade of grass is under God's particular supervision, definitely anything that happens to us in our own lives. Every opportunity that comes our way is not random, it's for a reason. And we have a beautiful example here from Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph, in the Bible, one of Jacob's 12 sons in the Torah.
Sorry.
And, you know, Yosef had a hard...
I'm just really sensitive about those
Yeah,
words.
you're right. Thank you for the reminder. Yosef had a rough beginning to his life. You know, his brothers sold him into slavery, and he ended up in Egypt. But in the end, he became second to the king of Egypt, and he came up with that great plan to save the entire nation from starvation. And at one point, once he had already filled that role of being second to the king, his brothers showed up in Egypt. And we had the grand reunion eventually between Joseph and his brothers. It's the first time he's meeting them since they had sold him into slavery. If you were Joseph, what would be your feelings towards your brothers?
Since God was communicating with Joseph through his dreams, he'd have more of a profound understanding of his life situation.
Okay,
Therefore,
and you're right, he did.
understanding.
That's a
He
really
did.
good point.
You know, anyone in Joseph's position, it's so easy to consider yourself the victim. My brothers sold me into slavery. I did nothing wrong. Why did they sell me into slavery? All those years I had to suffer. But it's very interesting when we see exactly what Joseph told his brothers when he met them all those years later. This is text 6 on page 107. I'm not going to read through the whole text. I'm going to just pull out a few lines here. He tells his brothers like this: "But now do not be sad, and let it not trouble you that you sold me here. For it was to preserve life that God sent me before you." So of course his brothers are feeling guilty, right? And it's normal they're feeling guilty. They're imagining that Yosef is really upset at them. But Yosef tells them, don't worry. There was a reason that you sold me into slavery and a reason I ended up in Egypt. And he continues on to the next page. "And now it was not you who sent me here, but God.
That means we have no free choice.
We have..."
Even
Okay.
if bad, when we're doing something bad, it's like God have a reason for it.
It's an excellent question. So you're saying what happens to free choice if there's a reason for everything? This is what the message is. The message here is not with regards to our own actions, to what we do. It's a message regarding what happens to us. When it comes to what we do, our perspective is, I have free choice, I need to make the right choice. Part of God's plan is that I should choose between what's right and what's wrong. But when I look at what other people do to me, when I look at the opportunities that come to me in life, when I look at my circumstances, then my perspective should be, it's part of God's plan. I'm not a victim. I'm not going to start blaming. Someone did something wrong, yes, that's between them and God, and they have an obligation to work that out between them and God. Yes, Joseph's brothers definitely needed to work something out between them and God. They did something wrong. But as far as Joseph was concerned, he didn't need to feel anger. He didn't need to feel resentment. He looked at it from the perspective of nothing happens randomly. If this happened to me, it must be for a reason. And not just any reason, but a reason that contributes to my purpose on this earth. And in fact, it did. What happened to him contributed to him becoming second in command and eventually bringing all his family down to Egypt, eventually beginning the slavery in Egypt, which eventually led to the exodus from Egypt and the giving of the Torah and us becoming a nation. It was a very important step, and he realized that. And he was able to maintain that perspective.
We have to learn. We have to learn.
Exactly. We have to learn
Never
from what
be-
happens to us.
Never blame.
That's right. That's right. Now, it's hard. It's easier said than done, but it's something to chew over.
But it's everything
know?
like we have to accept.
That's
and
right.
Go ahead and find that this our mission.
That's right. But to put a more positive spin, we could even, for now, going back to the chart, let's focus on good opportunities that came our way in life. Sometimes we don't think much of it. We take things for granted, but we've had all kinds of opportunities. Take a minute to think of them, and then choose one and try to apply it. How could that opportunity help me further my life mission? So whether it's an educational opportunity you had, a career opportunity, a life-changing move, whatever that opportunity may be, how does that help your life mission? And feel free to fill that in your chart if you'd like in the next column.
You and I are both smiling.
It hits home, right?
Interesting. Challenging. Fun.
Now, if you really want to give yourself a challenge, you could use the example to be maybe an opportunity that wasn't so positive at first, but it doesn't have to be that kind of opportunity. You choose whichever you like.
Boy, this is making a lot of sense out of a lot of things.
Good. I'm glad. Okay, let's move on to people. This is a good one.
And I keep seeing Rabbi Dabrowski Friday night after dinner at his door with his wife, looking at me and saying, Rivka, be happy.
Well,
Finally figured out what he meant.
really. Well, that might tie into the next category, which is people, the people we find in our lives. And this will probably really resonate with you,
Oh, yeah.
hearing what you're saying. The people that we have in our lives is not random either. There's when it comes to giving charity, there's a certain detail in that mitzvah that if we have a certain amount to give, who do we give to first? Family. And if not family, then people in our own community, people who are closest to us. So looking at that law, what we would think is, why would I give first to those people? Because I'm closer to them. I feel closer. We're related, or we're very good friends. We know each other well, so of course that's who I would give to first. But the truth is, it's really the other way around. Why do I even feel closer to those people? I feel close to those people because God put those people in my life in the first place so that I could help them. Why are these people in my family in the first place? Why are these people in my community in the first place? Why did I find myself in a situation where I was getting close to these particular people? Because God wanted them to be close to me in my life. Because he knew that I have something specific that I can give to those people that no one else can. So that's one thing to consider when we look at the people in our lives. Do I have something unique that I can give to those particular people? But the other question we could also ask ourselves regarding people is, was that particular person put in my life to teach me something that I need to learn? Right? Going back to Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, there's another great quote there. Who is wise, Benzoma says. Who is wise? Who's considered a wise person?
Everybody.
He who learns from every person. Someone who says, I know already, I know it already, I know more than them, they have nothing to teach me, that's a fool. A wise person is someone who says every single person has something to teach me. And you know what could be in the negative sense too? Baal Shem Tov teaches us that if we perceive something negative in another person, a flaw, it's a mirror. That person is a mirror to me. That negative flaw I see in that person is simply a reflection of a flaw I have in me. So that's something to teach me too. Every person is in my life to teach me something. So take a minute and reflect. Reflect on people in your life who are influential. You might not even know them personally, but it's someone that you admire. Or think about people in your life that may need you. and choose one. How could that person be part of my life mission? And it's very interesting that you're mentioning this now, because this also brings us very seamlessly into the last category of circumstances in our life. And there's a very beautiful story that illustrates that point exactly. So that brings us to places. So have you ever found yourself in the exactly the right place at exactly the right time? We all travel through many, many places, whether it's somewhere we lived for an extended period of time, or somewhere we visited on vacation, or someplace we happened to travel through and we didn't even plan to travel through, right? All kinds of places we find ourselves in. And again, it's never random. The Lubavitcher Rebbe had asked somebody to take Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, his wife, Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, out for fresh air every single day. So every day, this driver would drive Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka to a certain park to go out a little bit, get out of Brooklyn a bit. And they always took the exact same route. And one day they were driving, and their usual route was blocked off for road work. So they had to detour onto a parallel street and get to their destination that way. As they're driving along this alternative route, suddenly they hear a lady screaming in Russian. And when they get to the next traffic light, Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka stops her driver and says, "You know what, could you please turn around? I heard someone screaming. I'd like to see what's going on." So they turn around and they go back to that home, and they see a lady standing on the sidewalk outside her home screaming. There's a marshal's truck parked at the curb, and men carrying out furniture and other household items from the home into the truck. So Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka asks her driver to please go up to the marshal and find out what's going on. And so he does. And the marshal explains that this woman has not paid rent for many, many months, and it reached the point where she is now being evicted from her home. And so the driver comes back, the chassid, and he comes back and he relays the message to Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka. So Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka asks this chassid to go back to the marshal and ask him how much this woman owes, and if he will take a personal check. So the chassid wasn't really sure where this was all going, but he went back to the marshal, and it turns out that the woman owes around $6,700. And the marshal says yes, as long as he can confirm with the bank, he will accept a personal check. And not only that, if he gets the money that's owed, then his workers who are here now will actually carry everything back into the house for the woman. So the driver comes back to Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, relays the message again. Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka pulls out her checkbook. She writes out a personal check for the full amount, $6,700. She gives it to her driver, and the driver goes and gives it to the marshal. The marshal, a quick call to the bank, confirms it goes through. He has his workers start to carry the stuff back in, and quickly Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka tells her driver, "Quick, let's go. I don't want the woman to know anything about this. Let's leave." And they left. A little while later, the driver couldn't hold himself anymore. And he turns to the Rebbetzin and he says, "Rebbetzin, what was that all about? Why did you just give such a huge sum of money to a lady that you don't even know and you'll probably never see again?" So Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka says, "You know what, if you really want to know, I'll tell you." She says, "When I was a little girl, my father, who was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, so my father took me for a walk in the park. And at one point, he sat me down on a bench, and he said to me that nothing in life is random. If something happens to you that's a little bit different than usual, or you see something, this is like what you were saying, Valentina, you see something that's a little bit unusual, it's there to point something out to you. It's there for a reason. It's there to teach you something." And so the Rebbetzin continues. When our usual route was blocked today, and we had to travel through a different road, and suddenly I heard this lady screaming, I knew that that was the reason we had to make that detour. And so I asked you to turn around and go back. That was the purpose, to help this lady. That was the purpose why the road was blocked today, and we had to go along the parallel route. So every place we find ourselves in has that message for us. Why am I here? So for your last category on the chart, take a minute to think of a place where you feel comfortable, especially comfortable, a place that you especially love, a place that you spend a lot of time in, or a place that you would love to spend a lot of time in and hope to travel to one day, or a place where you do plan to travel to soon, or maybe a place where you found yourself in once where you had no intention of being there. And choose one of those places. How did that place, or how can that place, or how will that place contribute to my life's purpose? And here we have all the pieces of the puzzle coming together. If we look at all the pieces as opportunities, the places, we have our personality, we have our opportunities that life presents to us. We have the people in our life. We have the places we find ourselves in. We take all those pieces and we put them together. It gives us a really clear picture of what I might be meant to accomplish, what my purpose might be here in this world. My own custom-made specific purpose. My unique personality, my unique opportunities, the people in my specific life, the places I find myself in, that's all unique to me. And it all comes together to create a custom-made purpose, a custom-made mission. I'd just like to end with a story. 2 boys were sent by the Lubavitcher Rebbe all the way out to some islands in the state of Alaska, the Aleutian Islands. And they were sent simply to bring some Judaism to the people there. They're there for a week already. They didn't find one Jew. Not one. So they're ready to go back, and they're a little bit discouraged. But they thought, you know what, let's try the elementary school. We didn't try there yet. Let's see, maybe there's a Jewish child in the school. So they went from classroom to classroom. Each classroom, they knocked on the door. They asked the teacher, any Jewish children in this class? No. Next classroom, no. Next classroom, no. Finally, they get to the last classroom. They knock on the door and ask the teacher, you have any Jewish students in your classroom? And immediately the teacher says no. But before the 2 yeshiva boys can leave the classroom, a little girl in the back of the class pipes up, raises her hand, and says, Mom, you mean we're not the only Jews in the whole world? So the mother, or the teacher, was a little bit flustered, and she told the yeshiva boys she'll speak to them after she finishes her class. So later on that day, she met with them. And she explained to them, she says that she doesn't know much about her heritage, and she doesn't feel very comfortable teaching her daughter about it. And since there's no other Jews on this island anyhow, she kind of pushed it aside and felt no need to bring it up. And so the boys spoke to her, and they explained the beauty of Judaism and the beautiful heritage that she has, and she ended up buying a mezuzah and some Jewish books. And then she asked them, she says, you know what, do you mind just speaking to my daughter for a moment or two and giving her some sort of message, inspiration, like you gave me? So they said, sure, with pleasure. So they sat down with this little girl and they told her the following. You know, every Friday, 18 minutes before sunset, every Jewish woman and girl has a special mitzvah to light a candle. And that candle ushers in Shabbat in that place. And Jewish women and girls do this all over the world. So in Israel, the women light their candles and the girls light their candles, and then it's Shabbat in Israel. An hour or so later in Europe, the women and girls in their countries, they light their candles and they bring Shabbat in there. A few hours later, on the east coast of North America, the women and girls light their candles, bring Shabbat there. And a few hours later, on the west coast of North America, the women and girls bring in Shabbat there. You, Stacy, the little girl Stacy, you are in the very last place on earth where you have the opportunity to bring in Shabbat. Your candle, your Shabbat candle, completes the whole circle of the entire world ushering in Shabbat. So who knows? Maybe that's why this mother and daughter found themselves the only Jews on this island. Perhaps their mission in life is to complete the circle, to make sure the very last time zone in the world, the farthest point in the entire world, also brings in Shabbat. And then there's Shabbat candles there as well. And the message is the same for every single one of us. We all find ourselves in our unique circumstances. And sometimes we grumble about it, and sometimes we're grateful for them. But what's important for us to know is that it's not random. Our unique circumstances are because perhaps that is my unique mission. And as we come closer and closer to Purim, I wish you all that the energies of the season gives us the clarity of what our life mission may be, help us put the puzzle pieces together, and if necessary, give us the courage, as in the case of Esther. She needed courage, give us the courage to carry through and fulfill our life mission. Understatements. Especially since once he achieved this position of power, he became prime minister, he's quite puffed up with his own importance, and he decides that everybody needs to bow down to him when he passes, because he is so important, he is the king's right-hand man. But of course the Jews, led by Mordechai, the leader, the Jewish leader at the time, who also happened to be Esther's uncle, they would not bow down. We don't bow down to people, we only bow down to our one God, Hashem. And this enraged Haman to no end, until he decided he's going to choose a date out of a lottery. In Persian, a lottery is Pur, hence the name Purim, the name of the holiday. He chose a date. This is the date he's going to get rid of all the Jewish people. He's just going to kill them all out. And the day he chose was Yud Gimel Adar, the 13th day of Adar. So when the Jews heard of this decree, Mordechai immediately gathered them all together to pray together, to fast together, to beg God to save them. And as well, Mordechai went to speak to his niece Esther at the palace. And he begged her, being that she's in this position of power, she is in a position that no other Jewish person is in. She has an opportunity that no other Jewish person could take advantage of. And he begs her to please go speak to the king, who has the ultimate say, to take away this decree, to do something. And she struggles with this because it was at great risk to her life. No one was just allowed to go to the king when they wanted to. They had to be called. And if someone just shows up at an audience with the king, they may lose their life if the king decides. That's the kind of mood that he's in. But in the end, Esther agreed to do it.
So it
But
will
in a
vary
normally
then.
year, it's always on the 13th of Adar, and it's just called Adar.
I don't, oh, I see. Okay.
Usually, whatever takes place in Adar, in a leap year, it's in the second Adar. Unless that event took place specifically when it was a leap year in the first Adar. Okay. So we start feeling Purim in the air. So whether that's on a practical level, and we're starting to get ready for Purim, we also have the spiritual energy of Purim in the air. And as we get closer and closer, that gets stronger and stronger. So just a word about what Purim is all about. What are we celebrating on Purim? So I don't know how familiar you all are with the Purim story, perhaps to different degrees. I'll give a short synopsis of the Purim story, and we'll move on from there. So it all began in the 4th century, before the Common Era. King Ahasuerus was the king of the Persian Empire, which spanned 127 lands. So very, very large, and he ruled all of that and all the people in those lands. He had just got rid of his queen, Queen Vashti, because she did not obey him. That gives us an idea of what kind of king he was. So now he's at the point of looking for a new queen. And he gathered all the girls in his entire kingdom, and he chose his queen from amongst them, who happens to be, of all the girls, Jewish Esther. She became the queen, Queen Esther. Meanwhile, around this time, King Ahasuerus appoints a new prime minister, Haman, who was definitely not a Jew lover, and that would be quite the... And she went to the king, Ahasuerus, and what did she ask? She asked if, together with Haman, they can come to a party that she is going to host. And that's what happened. She hosted them at a party, and at that party, when Ahasuerus asked what it is he can do for her, she requested they come to a second party. And it was at that second party where she reveals her true identity to King Ahasuerus, that she is a Jew. And there is an evil man who wants to wipe out her and her entire people. And she points to Haman. And of course, the king is enraged, who wants to hurt the queen and her people. And instead of Mordechai hanging on the gallows that Haman prepared, Haman was hung on his own gallows, and Mordechai was appointed prime minister instead. Not only that, but King Ahasuerus granted the Jewish people an opportunity to defend themselves against their enemies, which they did on the 13th day of Adar. Instead of them being wiped out, they were able to defend themselves against all their enemies who wanted to kill them. And then on the next day, the 14th day of Adar, they rested from the battle, safe, and were able to celebrate their miraculous salvation. And that's why, until today, every single year on the 14th of Adar, we remember this, and we relive it, and we celebrate it. Now, like every Jewish holiday, there are 4 mitzvot. Well, not always 4, but there's always mitzvot, and on Purim there are 4. And those are integral to our celebration of the day. So number 1, we have the mitzvah of Megillah. What is the Megillah? So the Megillah is a scroll on which is written the entire chain of events of the Purim story, regardless of your talents and your passions. Even if you did nothing all day, you just are here.
Definitely not just here. But does this define me?
Does it define your purpose? Does it contribute to your purpose?
It contributes.
Okay, contributes but doesn't define.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on that? What would the difference be?
Well, I learned from Rabbi Dabrowski years ago that my purpose is to serve God.
Mm-hmm.
So in whatever way I can, and these will contribute to my doing that,
Mm-hmm.
but they aren't my purpose.
Okay, so you're saying there are many other factors that contribute to your purpose, this being just some of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything? Okay, let's hold on to this thought, and we're going to return to it. Okay? Tonight is actually the very beginning of the next Hebrew month, the second Adar, the series of 2 Adars. Last class we discussed the first Adar, now we're beginning the second Adar, which means that in exactly 2 weeks from today, we have the holiday of Purim.
And we discovered that Natalia's birthday is on the 13th.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So that means
Going
it's
into
on
Purim.
the second Adar now?
Yeah. No, it means this year it is.
This year it's in the second Adar.
Yes, because
Oh, I see.
there are 2 Adars.
Oh, I see.
All right, so I'm going to begin tonight's class by doing something a bit different than usual. I'll ask you to please help yourself to one of those papers and pens in the middle of the table. Now, those of you who have the student book, that chart is in there as well, but I just printed out some extra copies because we're actually going to fill them in, and you probably prefer to do that on the paper. Now, I'm going to explain the chart in more detail later on in the class, but for now, I'd like you to take a look, please, at the very top of the chart, where it says personality. And take a minute to think about what makes you, you. Your talents, your passions, your skills. And write down some of them in the box under the heading examples. And you do not need to share them, so feel comfortable to write whatever you wish over there. Okay, everybody ready? Now let me ask you like this. Do you think whatever you wrote in that box, whatever makes you, you, does that define your purpose of being here? Or is there a purpose to you just being, regardless of what you contribute?